As an anesthesiologist, when I give anesthesia, it's always because there's something else that is going to happen. There's going to be a surgery, a procedure, some type of imaging. But in this room here, anesthesia is administered and there is no procedure that follows. What happens in this room under anesthesia?
We are trying to understand what happens when people are anesthetized. And usually we think that when people are anesthetized that they are totally unconscious. But it seems that this is not always the case. That even though being aware of the environment and of the, let's say in surgical setting on the surgery is really rare, thankfully, people do have experiences when they are under anesthesia. And these are actually dream experiences. My name is Dr. Pille Rinsika, and I'm a postdoctoral researcher in the lab of Dr. Boris Heifetz.
So my name is Boris Heifetz. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Anesthesiology, Perioperative, and Pain Medicine at Stanford University. And in the last 15 years, have launched a research program that encompasses both human studies and animal studies, all geared towards understanding what I'll call non-ordinary states of consciousness and what therapeutic value they may have. Now, to get to what my lab actually does is I've been intensely interested in this idea of transformative moments, right? Big events that happen in people's lives, whether they're drug experiences or surgery, and the impact that that can have. And it turns out there's a lot of overlap between some of the most exciting things happening in mental health, like psychedelics, for example, and some of the experiences that patients report after surgery. And that is what the lab is geared towards understanding, is how do drugs work in the brain, how do big experiences work in the brain, and how do we harness that to improve the human health?
To understand that, we need to be able to manipulate the situation. So we need to be able to give different anesthetic doses that would either result in dreams versus no dreams, to measure brain activity at the same time and see what happens. And this is what we can do in an experimental setting where, in typical surgical setting, you have all these other confounding variables, right? People have the surgery, there's a lot of other things going on. To try to understand that, we need to kind of take the anesthesia out of the surgical context, put it in experimental context, and try to tease apart what is going on, can we produce it, can we control these anesthesia dreams, and then ultimately hopefully use it in a clinical setting.
When you have a study participant who's enrolled and they come into this room, talk me through step by step what they go through as their dreams are being assessed under anesthesia.
The first thing we do is place the EEG cap, so EEG stands for electroencephalography, on their scalp, on the head. And this is then the method that measures electrical brain activity. We ask the participants to sit on this chair or lay on the bed. We can put it down. And then we attach all the different vital monitors. And when everything is set, Dr. Boris Heifetz then inserts an IV or intravenous cannula into the veins, basically through which we then infuse propofol. We do some baseline recording of brain activity before the participant is sedated. And when everything is ready, then we start the anesthesia session by infusing propofol, which is controlled via the pump, which itself is controlled via the computer software. And so then we let them to go to sleep, what we call sleep, even though the anesthesia sleep is not really that sleep that we have normally at night. While they are asleep or under anesthesia, we continuously monitor their brain activity. We can see the activity that they have in different areas of the brain, and we are especially zooming in on certain areas, especially the frontal areas, because we know that areas of the brain that typically are involved when we're awake and able to think and do all these kind of higher cognitive functions, like have working memory, remember what we just did, and plan and reflect on how we feel, and then talk and everything. And we believe that this possibly reflects the dreaming state, where the participants are sedated under anesthesia, but they have more activity going on in the brain, especially in the frontal areas. So we think that it might reflect that they might be dreaming.
To make sure that I'm clear about that,
yeah.
You believe that patients are dreaming or having dreamlike activity under anesthesia when you can see the the brain waves have gotten to a certain place where there's activity in the front of the brain that's ordinarily associated with higher levels of cognition, but the patient is not awake.
Exactly. Yes, exactly.
So then the patient starts to wake up,
Yeah.
and what happens?
Let's say we see that they might be dreaming, we keep them in this state possibly for some time, and then we start waking them up, or we let them emerge themselves. So we have different protocols. And then first we make sure that they are actually responsive, that, you know, Dr. Boris Heifetz calls their name and says, do you know where you are and what's happening, what day, time it is. And then once we understand that they are responsive and awake, then I take over, and then we interview them in detail about the experiences they had during this anesthesia. So we ask if they had any dreams, and if they had, to describe those dreams in as much detail as they can. And then we ask a lot of other questions about what they felt and what happened in their dream experiences.
I was trying to do some background reading for this. Like, where do you start when you're trying to invent a new therapy of anesthesia-induced dreams for PTSD? So I went back to my Psych 101 class. Carl Jung, right, the German psychiatrist, philosopher, protege of Sigmund Freud, names that we are all very familiar with. He was really like one of the last people to really write about the transformative potential of dreams in a big way. And reading through what he had written, you know, over 100 years ago was really, it's illuminating in how some of the same sorts of themes keep coming back up. And this idea that dreams can help surface content that can help people see problems in a new way, that, you know, as the state of the field, it has not really progressed from that. So just think about that when we're talking about, like, where was the field when we started? That's where the field was, is really as a curiosity and something that really was unwieldy and not easily controlled. You can't, you know, it's very difficult to get people to control dreams and to use that in a very directed therapeutic way. In 2013, there was already evidence that this drug, MDMA, also known as ecstasy, had the ability to, I don't want to say cure PTSD because we don't really know if it's a cure, but patients in these clinical trials would take this drug that is on the most restricted category of drugs, Schedule 1, and they would take it in the context of psychotherapy with a trained therapist. And these are folks who'd had years of nightmares, you know, lots of trauma, and a lot of symptoms of PTSD. And after a single session, they would lose their symptoms. They would lose their diagnosis. They no longer had these nightmares. They no longer had these recurrent thoughts, compulsions, and depression, drug use. All these things got better. So that was that was very early on. That was in 2013, 2014. There was already evidence growing through formal clinical trials that this new style of treatment that involved a big central psychoactive event could have powerful effects on mental health. 2019, 2020, I met Harrison Chow. He was telling me about these crazy things that he's been seeing. Like, he's been studying dreaming in patients coming for anesthesia for a long time. He's written books about it. And I think that no one had really made this connection between really that type of non-ordinary state of consciousness, right? Like, that's the things that people say, the kinds of closure they seem to get, the kind of working through problems that seem to occur in the patients that Harrison is writing about are the same sorts of stories I had been hearing about in patients undergoing psychedelic therapy. And it immediately seemed to me that there was a link. And that's what set us on this current path of studying dreams induced by anesthetics for mental health purposes. It's this basic idea that there's an altered state that we can induce by any number of means that can allow people to process trauma that was otherwise unprocessable. And it's pretty remarkable that you can do this with an anesthetic, which is not a tightly controlled drug, maybe just as well as you can with MDMA, which has gotten a lot of attention, some good, some bad. There are a lot of issues with drugs like MDMA, but the fact that we could do this with a drug like propofol was really amazing to me. And we started really looking deeply into what was possible and what actually were the effects of anesthetic dreaming in patients who have PTSD.
So I am an anesthesiologist that is almost 35 years in the practice now. First started out as a cardiac anesthesiologist and then transitioned to regional anesthesia. Started observing a lot of dreams actually with kind of regional anesthesia. So now what I was seeing with these propofol-based anesthetics with regional blocks and being able to kind of lighten patients at the end, I could begin to see the EEG patterns on the SedLine EEG. We started working at Stanford in the orthopedic area first, and seemed to be able to use EEG signatures with propofol anesthetic to, pretty reliably reproduce. Now we were probably on the order of 50 or 60% being able to predict, patients reporting dreaming.
Can you tell me a little bit more about what the aha moment for you was back in, it sounds like 2007, when you realized that there's something about anesthesia and dreaming or dreamlike experiences?
The aha moment was the patient that had PTSD that had claimed that previous anesthetics, and I wasn't the anesthesiologist, but she previously had propofol anesthetics with regional anesthesia, in which she said she got better. And that was the first question where that's the big aha moment, because what you had a patient telling you is that anesthesia was basically changing her brain. Everything that I understood about anesthesia and how it affected central nervous system or peripheral nervous system is that you give it, and if you give it in the right way, it goes away, and it doesn't have a neurological effect. And here you have a patient who's saying, this is changing her brain, basically.
We got our first case report where a patient recovered from this acute stress disorder brought on by being attacked at close range with a knife. Unbelievable story. Is published, and I think our case report really only scratches the surface. And listening to these patients is it evokes the kind of response that I don't know. It gives me goosebumps really to listen to these folks, these patients talk about their trauma and then their recovery. Anyway, that was our first case, and then we found two more. Mare, who I think you've talked to, describes in beautiful detail how she had this experience of reunion, catharsis, closure with her deceased son. And that was just from looking. That's once we started paying attention to what patients are doing in the operating room and doing it systematically, doing this style of anesthesia that really amounts to just slow emergence from anesthesia and letting patients awaken at their own pace, not touching them, and seeing what they have to say.
So I'm Mare Lucas, and a couple years ago, I guess 2022, I was diagnosed with stage 2 HER2 positive, ER positive breast cancer. So I went through a treatment of chemotherapy for many months, and then surgery, and then after that radiation, and then like another surgery. And so it was during that first surgery that my life intersected in a positive way with Dr. Chow. It was the day of my surgery at Stanford, and I had my surgery like late in the day. It was a very extremely stressful day. The nurse anesthesiologist came into the room and told me what was going to happen, and next thing you know, I'm whatever I'm under, and I don't remember anything. And then I remember very extremely vividly, like in 4K resolution, in like every color of the rainbow you could come up with, and with heightened sound. I was having the first sort of, I call it experience. They like to call it a dream, but I call it an experience. And in this one, I was watching our youngest child be born. He's now 17. And I was sort of hovering over over the birth, and it wasn't really watching the birth. It was more like, I described it as like sucking in the beauty and the joy and seeing people and hearing voices and seeing him in his little, baby bassinet thing. And I was just sort of like hovering above it, like sort of sucking in the love and the memories and the emotions of that. I remembered that there was like his voice over my shoulder, and to the effect of like, are you doing well? Are you having happy dreams? And apparently like I gave a thumbs up or something like that. So then I went back under. And in this one, those two boys were running in the park near my actual house now in Palo Alto. And we have a little corgi, and so the corgi was running around, and you have to laugh at corgis because they're funny looking dogs. And so they're laughing and we're running. And the older son was the one that died by suicide, like at that time, 5 years prior. And so again, and it was him around the time that he died, and then the younger son in today's time period. So it was like fast forward to today, but the other son was alive. And so they're running around giggling, and my son that we lost had a very, very deep, loud voice and laugh, like he just filled the room type of laugh. And so I'm hovering above, and I can hear them laughing and joking, and I can hear his laugh. I have goosebumps now just thinking about it. And so it was this beautiful dream, sunny day, everything like that. And then I guess I like started to come out of it, and I start talking about, I guess, the dream about how the boys are running in the park, and that I got to see Zane. And then I guess I start to realize that also was not real, that was this dream. And I think I just started crying like a lot, like just gushing tears. And I say something like, but he's dead. And apparently I said, but thank you for giving me that time with my son again. And like, that's how like real this felt. And I should say that like, I'm extremely calm like the next day after the surgery. And that's not my normal state, to be calm, especially when like this whole thing was a mess. So then I think it was the day after that, I was actually at a restaurant, and I get a call, and it says, "Hey, is this Mary? Mary Lucas?" Yeah. And it's like, "Oh, this is Harrison Chow. I was the anesthesiologist at your surgery." And he starts, I think, asking me questions about like, clarifying like, who was I talking about in this dreams, and did I lose a child, and how this whole thing go? So I take them through, 4 kids, 2 of them, the dreams, explain it, say that we had lost, Zane to suicide. But since Zane died, it was almost too much to handle. And my nightmares were so bad that I would scream, sometimes people chasing me, sometimes me trying to save him, like all kinds of just awful screaming nightmares. And sometimes my husband would just have to shake me out of it. So I described that to him, or Dr. Chow, like some portion of this, that yes, I had been through this, and that Zane had, died by suicide. And the reason we have the little corgi is in part that I wasn't able to get Zane a dog when he was alive, and he loved Shibas and corgis. And so that dog is sort of my, part of the way that I made up to him, perhaps. And so I always say, like, I wish you could have met Moxie, because he would have loved the dog, and he would have understood that at least I did it for his younger brother. Like, I got the dog, dude, he got the dog. And so watching them in the park with the dog wasn't just being able to hear Zane's voice as like a man again, but it was him seeing that I had gotten the dog for the younger brother. It's weird to cry about a dog, but like, it just was like it was just like such a wish fulfillment. And like my brain, like I know objectively that Zane didn't see the dog running in the park. Like I get that it didn't really happen, but some part of my brain believes that it did. And I'm able to have, some level of, it gets some level of comfort from that. It does a lot on its own, right? But like there's some sort of peace that it came to. Sometime quickly after that, I started meeting with Dr. Hack, and just as like a counseling session basically, and to talk about like what was the PTSD that I had. So we talk about that, and then I have all kinds of the GAD, the general anxiety disorder, and a bunch of different analysis from when I had therapy a couple years after Zane died. So I had this, I'll call it like wonderful documented evidence of my PTSD. So pretty quickly, I didn't have dreams, and over, I don't know, a matter of a month or so, like it really becomes apparent that I haven't had nightmares, and that my whole sort of natural state of being at like anxiety 10 was probably down, I don't know, at least to like a 7 right off the bat. Like it just, and that the nightmare stopping was really remarkable. I haven't had a nightmare in years, which I don't even know if I could say. I mean, I had nightmares even since I was a little girl.
How long ago was it that you had the anesthesia along with surgery, after which you stopped having nightmares?
That and the first one was 2022. The second one was 23. So I am 2 years nightmare free now.
Wow, that is incredible. The story that you shared, I really appreciate your openness with sharing this, and can't imagine what it feels like to have gone through any of what you've experienced. So I really appreciate just the how candid you've been and forthcoming about what that was like. What else can you tell me about the nature of dreams that patients have reported that you've ascertained?
We've done this like 1,000 times, and at Stanford, and about 650 reporting dreams, and we've had one patient report a negative experience. We realized that people were getting these high definition memory-based experiences. We know there's time acceleration. The longer this goes on, a lot of times these dreams will start looping. They'll actually start repeating themselves. Nobody's generating a dream based upon new things, right? There's nothing twisted about dreams. All the dreams are memory-based. And so we're not getting any kind of learning dreams or dolly dreams or twisted dreams. We're just getting dreams based on memory.
You mentioned that there was a benefit over MDMA in that, at least insofar as MDMA is quite a bit more tricky to study on account of being a Schedule I substance in the United States, whereas propofol is not. Are there any other benefits that you can imagine or that you've observed so far when using propofol over MDMA in terms of eliciting a dream state, or really any aspect of your research?
So psychedelics are one way to have a role. Every time you take a psychedelic, I can promise you, 90% of the time you're going to have a big experience. Now, there are a lot of issues with psychedelics, like, the length of time that you have the experience, the intensity of it, the anxiety, who's giving it to you, versus something like propofol, where in these patients, it looks like it's happening over a 15-minute period. And what's more is it's internally generated. These experiences that we've seen in patients come from within. There's no external sensory input under anesthesia. These are the same things that have been cycling around in their minds and in their dreams for days, months, weeks, years in some cases, that now have an opportunity to come out. So we're basically allowing a container for a powerful experience to come forward without all of the other baggage that's associated with some of the other drugs used to achieve the same end. I'm not sure yet whether this is something that is really scalable or reproducible. We've seen some amazing things happen. I would like to know how we do that in a safe, reproducible way, and to really understand both the benefits and the risks. That's something that is very rarely paid attention to this early in the process, and we've seen a lot of high-profile failures with drugs like ketamine, vis-a-vis Matthew Perry, drugs like MDMA, this FDA decision to reject it, which your viewers are probably not aware of, but there have been a lot of setbacks, really, because I think people get caught up in the excitement of something new without really realizing that if something is really a potent, powerful therapy, it by definition has the ability to do harm in addition to whatever good it does. And that's something, the dose makes the poison.
What is really interesting is to know how many people actually remember having had dreams during anesthesia. And so we would like to actually ask people to tell us whether you remember having any dreams during anesthesia, and if you did, describe them. We would be super interested to hear about your experiences.
So we put a link in the description for the video if you want to click on that and describe what your own experiences were like under anesthesia. Dr. Sika, thank you very much for your time, for explaining what you do here. I look forward to future publications from the lab, and I've included in the description down below links to the research that your team has already produced, and I'm looking forward to seeing more in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you.